All right, welcome to the Gateway API meeting for August 15, 2022. We've got lots to get through today. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone this is a Kubernetes community meeting. That means a few things. Of course, follow the code of conduct, but also this agenda is wide open. If there's something you want to discuss, definitely feel free to add it to the agenda at any point or add it for a future meeting as well. This doc is something that I hope anyone can edit, and if not, let us know. But the goal is for anybody to be able to take notes. We always appreciate note takers, or to add new things to the agenda as they come up. I'll also add a note here. I think there may be one or two new people that haven't had a chance to introduce themselves yet. So if you're new to this call and want to introduce yourself, no pressure. We'd love to hear what brings you here. All right, well, we'll leave it with that. I think, Nick, you're up first. Get 1282.
Awesome. Yeah, so it looks like the initial doc that we wrote that's about the sort of the what and why seems like there's reasonable agreement on there. Haven't seen many yeah, you need to change this kind of topics. It's more like, hey, we need more detail here, which I agree. There's a couple of other comments, but yeah, but I think in general it seems like there's pretty good consensus there. So I'll open a PR to, like, with the initial get the same as Keith's already done for the Gamma ones. That's worked, by the way, while I was away.
Great, welcome back. I think Candace, you're up next.
Thank you. Just a quick question about egress, something that came up in one of my team meetings today. And I took a look around just to see if it had ever been discussed or there were any plans coming up for egress. But it looks like everything's stale on that. So I wanted to see, and I see that Keith has added a note that it's a deferred goal for Gamma. So just checking in to see what the community goals are for egress.
I think this, anyone can feel free to correct me on this, but my take is that it's something that there's wide interest in, but no one has volunteered to lead that exploration. So it's just kind of, as you mentioned, it's just kind of gotten stale. Costa, I see you've got your hand.
Yeah, I have some opinions on this subject, and we were discussing Gamma as well. I think the current spec can be used perfectly as is for egress. I mean, ingress and egress are just the same thing, if it's just a different direction. So if workloads in the mesh have a way to configure the gateway as an egress gateway, you have the same routing rules, the same principles apply there as well. It's nothing special. You have host and you can redirect them to a different, you can apply policies and you can do things differently. So I don't think we are very far from API perspective. It's just that, you know, we don't have test cases, we don't have implementations, and so forth. If it makes sense.
Yeah, there are some implementations that treat these cases differently, and there are, you know, some differences between like an ingress backend and an egress, you know, whatever you might call a backend, and an egress. It would be an external, you know, outside of the cluster, even endpoint for egress, which makes things a little different.
To some extent, I mean, I agree. There's some subtle differences here and there, but I'm worried about you know, creating a brand new specification for egress, especially since egress is so confusing. It needs to at least we have egress directly from pods and policies applied there. We have the egress gateway itself, which is another thing. And then you have the two types of ingress, terminating and not terminating. And we have integration with existing egress infrastructures, which, Squid and all the enterprise egress gateways. So it's a pretty large subject if you want to go, especially if you want to have it outside of the cluster.
Yeah, I'm not
Please.
particularly interested in pursuing it. I just wanted to see whether the community was pursuing it.
Thanks, Candace.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of thought here, not on egress specifically, but around handling it. There's some good comments in the chat around, I think CUJ stands for customer user journey, and collecting those requirements. I think that's going to be key here, because even in Gamma, when egress is often a service mesh use case, and when thinking about it from a Gamma perspective, it's not always clear what's attaching to what. And if you dig into that issue that's linked to that related issue, there is that the security problem of how some folks implement egress gateways with external name services. And there's a lot of concerns there of folks trying to go and use that. So John probably in the chat, John's comment there probably sums up how I feel about this. Is it's got a lot of complicated semantics and security implications. I think to your point, Costin, yes, the technology is not necessarily too different, especially when you start thinking about like the service mesh use cases for Gateway API. I think there's some kind of overlap in the technical aspects there. But from the security semantic point of view, I think there's absolutely a lot of discovery that needs to be done on what these actual concrete requirements are, and how we can do it in a secure way.
Yeah, I would probably summarize my thoughts on this as, hey, yeah, we all know we got to do it at some point, but it's probably a bit let down the priority list at the moment to spend too much time on it. Mike said in the chat that things that maybe pulling a get number and doing this how and why discussion about it, and then saying we're explicitly going to defer this to later, might be a bit more clear. If anyone wants to pick that work up, then there's a gap waiting to be written to do the initial sort of, hey, why, what would we do this? So what are we doing and why are we doing it? Not the how, sorry. And sort of say, like, hey, let's agree that when we do egress, we will be doing something. What is egress and why would we do that as part of the Gateway API and the service mesh primitives? And then let's leave it. And then let's explicitly say this is now deferred until until we come back to it later. Like it's not that we're never going to do it. It's that we're not ready to do it yet. That sounds like about the right thing to say to me. Does anyone else disagree there, or? Cool.
Yeah,
I
think that's a great summary.
Yeah. I think we've been cleaning up, Candace, we've been cleaning up issues. So and sort of trying to, clean up the backlog a bit and make sure that the stuff that's there is actionable. And that's why some of this stuff has been sort of staled, is because, no one's touched it for a while. That's all.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Great, thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, yet another great opportunity. If someone is looking to contribute, we can use all the help we can get. Move on to the next one here, which is a KubeCon item I added. I wanted to highlight, I don't think this has been sent out yet, but the contributor summit will be on Monday. There will probably be something that goes to the Kubernetes dev mailing list soon. But all org members, including Kubernetes SIG's org members, can join. I want to say it's traditionally been free, even if you're not going to KubeCon itself. I'm not entirely sure how it works this year, but there's generally no extra charge at least. it's my favorite part of KubeCon. I'd love to see as many of you there as possible. So just keep that, if you're thinking about going to KubeCon and you can be there on Monday, it'd be great to see lots of Gateway API people there. If you're not an org member yet, there's a documented process. Generally need a few PRs and you need support from org members from 2 different companies. That's high level. So I know we've got a number of new members through Gateway API and happy to get some more going as well. Yeah. And then next up, I've been chatting with Bob Killen and Jason about Gateway API event or I don't know what this looks like yet, but there's time available and space available for us to do something probably on Tuesday. So especially if you're already here for the Contribute Summit, would be cool if you just left Tuesday open if you can. Yeah. And if you have any time preference or anything like that, again, just ping in Slack or somewhere. And this is still, I think we should know more information next week from what they've been saying, but yeah, anyway. And the main conference is Wednesday to Friday. And I think we have Gateway API talks every day. I think probably a couple every day. So thanks to everyone that submitted something. Yeah. Any thoughts or comments on KubeCon before I move on?
I think Tuesday also there's a number of sort of colo events that people might need to go to. I +1 Rob's thing about going to the Contributor Summit if you can manage it. Personally, I will always prioritize the Contributor Summit over any other thing that's on that Monday. Yeah, because I find it's one of the most it's the 2 most useful days of the year for me. Yeah, and we had a great session in Valencia. Where people asked us a lot of questions about like the experimental and stable channel system and CIDs and stuff like that. So yeah, like if you want to come to those sessions, the questions get pretty in depth because you've got a lot of people who know a lot about Cube in the room. So, but I would say, make sure you speak up if you want to come to a Gateway API event of some kind, then you can't make it because on the Tuesday. I think maybe is Service Mesh Day on that day.
Yeah, it's hard to find something that, it does. Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot of conflicts with everything we choose. So it would be good to, if there are people who are interested, like Nick said, just let us know when you can't make it or days that are already completely spoken for, and we'll try and find something that works around that. Cool. All right, next up, conformance. As I think I discussed this last week or weeks before, I don't know, but we've had this general idea for a long time that if you have conformance tests, you need somewhere to describe that your implementation is actually conformant or not. Spent some time last week, actually just on Friday, talking with Hippie Hacker, one of the CNCF people who's been really focused on conformance. And he had some good tips and discussion and he wants to help, which all great. He's been more involved in upstream Kubernetes conformance, obviously, but had some tips for what we can do and even some thoughts about how this could eventually move from Gateway API, the project, to CNCF as a broader thing. But for now, starting here. Just looking at the upstream pattern, it seems simple enough and largely doable for us. Each upstream conformance report has a product YAML that just describes, hey, I just use COPS as an example, but just describes what the project is, the version the test was run against, and that's about it. A README that describes every step they took to run the conformance tests, and then the test log showing their test passing, ideally. And that's up to each implementation to provide for each version that has been released. That seems remarkably simple and something that will get us a long ways there. We have, as we're well aware, some unique bits that aren't really part of upstream conformance, and that's our conformance levels, our core extended, etc. And so I called out some things that we may want to do on top of what Upstream does. But I think really just the top level is if someone wants to take this and kind of document how we could accept conformance reports, that's kind of, I think, step one. Just here's a place where we can accept conformance reports, and any implementation is welcome to submit them here. I think eventually we want to get to a goal where our implementations page itself highlights this implementation was 100% conformant at this version of the API, something like that. But to even get to that point, we need to accept conformance reports somewhere. So I added this issue. Open to, is anyone interested in, I know there's been a lot of interest in working on conformance. Is anyone interested in kind of taking this forward?
Well, I definitely am, but I will stand aside and if someone else wants it.
Cool. Well, it sounds like Nick is has it for now, but definitely reach out. We're always open to new contributors here. Great. And just on that note, I just as I was going through trying to find issues for triage, I just looked at the ones labeled conformance, and I think we have 14 open right now. That I think anything that says area conformance is generally something with help wanted or should be help wanted. Most of them are currently unassigned. So if you're looking for an area to get involved in the API, this is a great one. You know, I think one of our big areas of investment in the upcoming releases has to be conformance. So anything you can contribute, there are massive ones and there are tiny ones here. Anywhere you can contribute is very welcome.
And
All
yeah,
right.
I wanted to call out. I'm not sure how you say name, but Mattia, maybe Mattia, for doing some great work, just finding little things and logging issues about them. Like that's really awesome. Yeah, that's exactly the sort of stuff we need to just yeah, to flesh out those conformance tests. If you find stuff like that, please just log an issue. Like issues are free. You know, and there's no. I would much rather have 5 issues describing a thing than none.
Yeah, completely agree. He's been creating some great issues here. So yeah, more of that. And you know, as you have an opportunity, if you see one of these that you say, oh, I could help with that, that's great too. Just comment on the bug that you want to take that one on. Cool. All right, I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about GEPs. I know we already mentioned Nick's GEP earlier on, but we have a few GEPs that are in the proposed state. I think, Keith, you currently own the 2 mesh GEPs. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I forgot to assign myself to them.
Cool. And then this one is new, the HTTP route filter policy attachment. This one, I guess I technically own, but I don't. If anyone wants to own policy attachment, by all means.
Yeah. If no one else wants it, I'll take it because
Okay.
I think between you and I, Rob, I probably did the most damage here with policy attachment. I think we definitely need to swing back around and talk about it again. I have noticed a lot of people talking about it and wanting to use policy attachment for service mesh stuff as well. So I think there's probably some space for us to talk again about, for us to go through like why we built it the way we did, what sort of stuff we were thinking about when we built it, and like if we should consider extending. Because I know I've sort of been surprised a couple of times. People are like, oh, we'll just use policy attachment for that. I'm like, I hadn't thought about that. So yeah, I think there's definitely a discussion that needs to be had. Then that probably needs an update, and we should close out the gap if it's
Actually, I need like separation of concerns between that and the proposed backend properties gap that's in progress right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the discussion on backend properties should help us figure out like what's the dividing line between using a policy and doing the backend properties. I think I have an idea. I don't have it very clearly explained yet, so I won't say it now. But yeah, so I think there's between those 2 things, I think we should yeah, so it probably makes sense for me to be honest.
Cool, thanks. while we're at this, I also wanted to highlight the gRPC route GEP. We got it in, which is awesome. Thank you, Richard, for your patience on this one. But I have noticed that we don't have conformance tests or documentation yet, which I think would be blockers for the 060 release. I'm not sure, is Richard on this call?
I'm here, yeah. Those are on my list. What is the timeline for the 060 release?
Pre-KubeCon, so that I think we're talking about late September here for 060.
Is there any good documentation I can follow for the general form of both conformance tests and documentation?
I have a PR that's working on conformance tests anyway, but I'll chat with you afterwards. I can try and help out, but working on better docs here.
Gotcha. Sounds good. I will work on those too.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Cool. Okay, so I wanted to cover just a few specific GEPs that are in flight right now. One, this is, I think, Keith, you're probably going to talk about this more tomorrow in the Gamma meeting, but is there anything you wanted to highlight in this context?
Yeah, just if anybody hasn't had a chance to come to some of the Gamma meetings, or if they have other thoughts in general about what Gateway API should be trying to accomplish when it comes to service mesh, this is the PR to take a look at. It really focuses on high level what and why around service mesh, and this kind of is going to be the springboard for the other two GEPs around mesh service, our mesh representation and service binding. I was actually working on those two GEPs and just found a lack of concrete description in guidance, and that's kind of with talking to John, this GEP came out of it. So if you have thoughts or interested, like this is a really good like checkpoint GEP if you're wanting to track progress for what we're doing over on the Gamma side.
Great, thanks. It's cool to see this moving along. I was impressed by this HTML bit here too.
I spent some time as a front end web designer for a little bit, and it's messy, but it gets the job.
Yeah, I have some limited front end back in earlier days too. So yeah, it's probably way out of date now, but you know, back in the day.
Keith, I'll have a look over that today because I can't make the Gamma meeting tomorrow because it's 2 o'clock in the morning for me. Yeah, I love you all, but yeah, not that much. So yeah, I'll see if I can put some comments on that today, or at least
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good. Oh, I forgot to mention I had a I was kind of trying to time box the other two GEP submissions by like pre-August 22nd. That's probably not gonna hold quite as well now with this new GEP. But I do want to try to get that GEP merged-ish around that same time. So just kind of shifting the timeline. So yeah, that sounds good.
Great. There was a new GEP that came up just in the past few days, I think. Sanskar, I think is his name, proposed this, and it makes a lot of sense to me. This is one of the few GEPs that just feels like a very obvious, straightforward addition to the API. We have a request header modifier in the API already, but we have no response header modifier, which could look near identical. That's the proposal anyway. I don't think Sanskar is on this call. Correct me. Yeah, it doesn't look like he's on this call. But yeah, reviews welcome on this. I think this is pretty straightforward. I did ask for a non-Envoy based example of this functionality, but otherwise it feels straightforward to me. I think Shane and I are the only ones who've looked at it so far. So if you have any additional feedback, definitely get it in. But otherwise, I think we can probably move it straight to implementable. Cool. Any hesitation on this one?
No, I'll have a look at it today, but yeah, like it looks pretty straightforward to me.
Cool. Thanks. And the massive one, route delegation. This one, I pinged Jeff, and I think he's not on this meeting, so I'll follow up with him offline. But I think we know the next steps here. We've kind of started to split things out into different categories and different PRs. We know that this one we want to merge as provisional and kind of highlight the top level comments that have not been resolved when we merge that. So I think we know what we need to do next. We just kind of need to get to that next state. I think that it's probably not worth adding more comments to this specific PR, and instead we can wait till we get a provisional gap in, and we can take on individual questions as they come from there. Yeah. Okay. Any other gaps that we should cover before I move on to next section? Cool. I'll keep on going. Reviewing conformance test PRs. I know I've reviewed a bunch of conformance test PRs, but I know I'm not the only person. I'm curious what other people are doing for a workflow here, because all I've been doing is just checking out the PR and running conformance tests against implementation of choice, and it's random depending on the day. But that has been my entire workflow, and it feels very random and manual and not ideal. And if every reviewer is doing the same thing, that's not great. So my question is, does it make sense to have some kind of non-blocking informational only pre-submit that runs against, say, 1 to 3 implementations of the API? I don't know. I know this is getting, we don't have a standard implementation of Gateway API, and we never want to give that appearance of this is the standard implementation of the API. But if that's what we're effectively doing when we're reviewing conformance tests, automating some portion of that could maybe be helpful. Any thoughts on that one?
I kind of struggled with the same thing when I was reviewing PRs, but I gathered from comments that most people are just running against whatever implementation they happen to be working on.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to pick beyond just that, but basically, yeah.
I mean, that's definitely what I've been doing.
So just to confirm, you're going to take a few implementations, put them into CI, and feed changes to them. That's the whole idea.
Roughly, and the worst part of this is trying to choose what those implementations are, because I don't want to ever appear preferential to any implementation. So this could never be a blocking thing. This could never be anything. But if it were at least informational in the sense of you added this conformance test and it broke these 2 implementations that were previously passing, and this is why, or the test completely failed to run. Like we don't even have anything that catches the test completely failed to run, other than manual testing right now.
I don't have any problem with the idea, but I do think that you should be like, all implementations can get in on this potentially. I mean, that could get to be a huge list, I suppose, but that's kind of where my head leans. I kind of lean towards just like make it available to anybody who wants to plug their implementation in.
I feel like we need to be respectful of test infra costs, and like there's a non-zero cost for every pre-submit we run. So I think we have 14 implementations today, and I expect that will only go up. So if we had 14 different pre-submits, I think that would be unfortunate, but I do want to avoid favoritism of any 1 or 3 or whatever implementations out there. So
Could you make it an open list and then just round robin one for each PR?
that's maybe a good idea. Yeah.
I think so. For me, one of the interesting things for some of the conformance tests that I authored was that it often felt like we were running ahead of the implementations. So I don't know if this is going to be the case for what percentage of conformance tests, because sometimes we're testing stuff that's already implemented widely, but oftentimes, like what you were asking about the conformance for gRPC root, I think it's unlikely that there's maybe more than one implementation of that out there currently. So that's something where you want multiple reviewers from different implementations to agree on how something should behave without necessarily like having the implementations to test against yet.
To clarify, I guess what I was meaning for this is that there are a number of conformance test changes and tweaks that we see come in that are really just bug fixes, right? You know, like I completely agree. Net new conformance tests are likely going to fail on the majority of implementations. But there is still something to be said for not having to, you know, like right now, anytime I see a conformance test PR, I know I'll save that for later because I need to like get my environment set up, check this thing out and whatever. It takes a little bit more time. I'm just trying to avoid that little part of the process if we can. But Costin, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I don't think it will should ever be the case where a conformance test doesn't pass, you know, all implementations or, you know, at least a significant number. I mean, at least for core features. For optional features, any implementations that claims to support that particular feature obviously should pass. I mean, you first implement the behavior and then you test it with, you know, servlets and you know, with Java in general. The compatibility test suite reflected what was the agreement and implementation, not you know, dreams or what we hope people will implement or as a way to force people to implement something in a particular way.
So I just have one comment. Rob, do we even know what's possible to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly straightforward to run conformance tests, at least for the in-cluster implementations that have a, you know, you can run them in kind for that matter. At least I would think it should be straightforward, but I'm interested in perspective of others.
I think it's also possible to call a hook. I mean, basically, run a test that just invokes a particular webhook equivalent provided by a vendor, and that in turn would run the test in the vendor cluster. Because a CI/CD system allows you to, you know, to basically the test will be just, hey, call this particular URL and wait for the response. So basically, test as a service in a way.
It feels like building that out will be quite a lot of work. I think it's. I agree that it is a worthy goal to have some sort of precedent that is basically just a sanity check that will check those small PRs and stuff like that. I think there's a whole bunch of problems that we have there about when you add a net new one like that, pre-submit will obviously fail because probably implementations won't have added new support for it yet, right? Like, and even if you're not doing that, like then you've got the problem of like, I know for Contour, like we were doing the conformance at like a tagged gateway API version. So, how do you then you'd need to build out, like each implementation will need to build out, make sure they build out like a runner that can run the tagged on all main, and you'll need to make sure you're running main rather than the or the PR branch, or like there's a bunch of sort of really fiddly detail stuff there that would need to happen. Is it a worthy goal? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think it's like a ton of work? Yes, very much so. And I think we need to be careful. We're not trying to boil the ocean here and sort of build an arbitrary framework for tested service, which would be cool, but like it feels like that's probably larger than what we need. I think this feels to me like this would be really nice to have, and if someone wants to spend some time like figuring out how to make it work, like more power to you. Maybe we need an issue to sort of park the discussion and that we freeze, Rob. I think for now we're stuck unless someone can put a reasonable amount of work into making this work. And I mean, maybe a better way to do this would be for the implementations for us to have maybe it would be a better way to do this would be for us to have like a place where the implementations can put, here's how you run our performance tests in this repo.
Yeah, I'd say like
Something
it
like that.
sounds like the perfect is going to be quite involved.
Yeah.
So we're not there yet. We should at least make it so that all the implementations that are listed, it's just very trivial for each implementation to tell someone authoring a conformance test to be like, here's a cut and paste. You do this, you can run the conformance test against it. So, it's just, if you have a change, then just here's how to check that it worked.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that in my mind, I 100% agree, Bowie. I think like a set of runbooks, maybe like that an implementation puts into this repo that says, hey, here's how you test with our thing. And then part of adding a new conformance test is that we say, hey, we want to see, part of this is that we want to see the new conformance tests, or we want to see a couple of outputs from the conformance testing for various letters, assuming that you run the runbook, and we want to see them passing, and just do this manually by people to start with. We can just make it easier so that you don't have to figure out every time how to get your infrastructure set up and figure out how to run each implementation things. There's just a standard template that we say, hey, here's a directory with all the templates for your implementation, put it in here, and then we'll expect people to test. And then people can test against your implementation. Something like that, maybe.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying of making it very clear how anyone can run conformance tests, but I also want to be clear that it should not fall on, say me as a reviewer, to run conformance tests for every implement. And I'm sure you're not saying that, but
no, I am not. I'm saying that the person who opens the PR, the PR is not reviewable for conformance test stuff until that person, once we have, in the glorious future where we have a runbook for each implementation or for a number of implementations, the PR is not reviewable until that person has done these manual steps. That's sort of like the precursor to figuring out how to automate it. Is if everyone's doing the same manual steps, then my experience in the past is if everyone's running the same runbook, it will not be very long before engineers will get annoyed and somebody will figure out how to automate it. But the step one to automating things is to give people a runbook and make them run it.
So one of my concerns there is that we could run into slower velocity just in terms of conformance PRs. We have the 14, 15 conformance issues that are open right now. And if everyone needs to figure out, not everyone has access to even a Kubernetes cluster they can spin up and run these tests on, for example.
Although that begs the question then that they're submitting a PR that they haven't tested. So well, what are you? I don't know about that.
Well, it's one thing to ask them, to run it against one implementation somewhere versus to run it against all or many.
I mean, maybe just saying hey, for conformance PRs to be reviewable, you need to have run it against one implementation using and you need to put some logs in here, sort of showing the conformance test run that you've done, and in the absence of having standard steps, putting your steps in the conformance test PR. That way, you need to have done it against at least one, right? I think at least one is a reviewable thing, but for everything, and then for adding new conformance tests, it should be more than one. Right, so I think for bug fixes, it should be fine to just be hey, this works on one of them, it should work on all of them. I don't know, maybe, but I think at least it feels to me like that's the way to do it, to say your conformance test PR is not reviewable until you have evidence in here of at least one implementation passing the conformance test. That means that you can say, hey, I think to start with, it'll still be friction, right? You or I, Rob, if we're reviewing them, we're still going to need to check them out and run them against whichever implementation they haven't done, right? Just to validate and say, okay, I ran it against this. But the more we do that, the more we should be able to write down the steps to do that, and then the more that we should be able to make this easier by giving people the steps to do that, so that then we can say, hey, PR author who's writing conformance test stuff, this is on you to do it. And if there's a standard runbook or something like that, then that makes it easier, and it should be easier for people to do it. And then those set of runbooks is then the set of things that you would base any eventual automation on, right?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. We have a new conformance docs page coming. It seems like we can link out to some runbooks from that page. So if anyone already has a runbook for conformance tests or is able to add one soon, that would mean that there's a chance your conformance test will be run automatically against new PRs. Well, not automatically, but as a requirement for them being reviewable.
Yeah, I think I did see the conformance docs PR. I think we should get that one in and then add this stuff as a as an additional issue to then put on that page to figure out some process. I don't think what we choose matters that much. It's more important that we have a process, and then we figure once we've done it a bit, we find the problems with it and fix them. But we just say, hey, we're going to do this for now and then figure it out later.
Cool, thanks. I'll add an issue to track that, and yeah, and go from there. Great. Okay, next up, I just added this as a note because it's the next one of these meetings anyway. Keith and Gamma team are going to be presenting something next week, just as an informational status update. So if you're interested in how that's going and you haven't been able to attend their meetings, that'll be next week. With that, let's get into PR and issue triage. I wanted to highlight this issue that was basically asking for a backport, a 0.5.something release for conformance tests only. I think that makes sense. And Shane agrees with me, but I'm open to broader discussion here, right? That it would be the first time we'd had a conformance only release. That feels acceptable to me, but interested in what others think here.
A patch version conformance only release makes perfect sense to me. I think that's one of the best candidates I've ever heard for a patch version.
To be clear, the change here is changing the resolved refs condition from invalid certificate ref to ref not permitted if a reference grant is not present. Is that correct?
That's correct, but I interpret this a little bit more broadly to say that it probably makes sense to take any area conformance PRs that have merged since 050 was released and backport them to 051.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I
and
think we'd need to
specifically
be careful
because
there. Sorry, Shane. You go.
specifically because they're being used as a Go library now. So we kind of have to think of it in those terms going forward.
Yeah, I think the important thing is just to make sure that we're not bringing in new conformance tests for new behavior. We're only bringing in like bug fixes to behavior that existed in 050. You know what I mean, Rob? Like we need to be pretty careful about that. So
that's a very good and close distinction here, and depends on. Okay, so there's two interpretations of that. Does that mean we should avoid adding in all net new conformance tests that have been added after the release? Or does that mean we should avoid backporting just conformance tests for net new behavior?
I feel like it seems like it's a pretty fuzzy line there, right? Like, if you think about, there's a couple of things where I can't remember when we did it, but we changed like some stuff around a bunch of the condition stuff based on some of the issues that Mike opened. We tightened up some of the language about the conditions that actually changed the behavior a little bit. In this case, the condition should be this, other than not this. And so doing that will actually break people's implementations. If they were conformant to the old one, that will actually be a breaking change. So should that be a patch release? Probably not. So, so it is important for us to be like, okay, we need to think carefully about what that API guarantee thing actually is there. It feels like we shouldn't be breaking. If you're conformant to 050, you should, and we do a patch release to do conformance bug fixes. you should still be conformant without having to change too many things, right? Like, we shouldn't break you in a patch, break your conformance in a patch release.
So, okay, so two follow-up questions here. One, do you think something like this is a net new test, but it's really just adding test coverage of previously existing functionality? Do you think something like this should be backported to 05X?
I mean, I'd like to see it, but it means that then the net effect, if we do it, is that people who were passing 050 conformance will now no longer until they update to 051 conformance. Is that okay? Probably, right? Like, because it is a patch release. It's kind of like we just haven't written down like what are the conformance guarantees. We need to just agree on, is this okay, and say that that's the expectation. I mean, this is the first time that we've done 050 is the first time we've done this, right? So it's probably okay for us to say, hey, your conformance, and actually probably this discussion is kind of dependent on the outcome of the discussion about how we record conformance, like what level of conformance you passed and what version of conformance testing you passed. And that way you can say, hey, maybe you're conformant to the 050 conformance tests, but you're not conformant to the 051 conformance tests, right? Like, and it's okay that it breaks. This is a new release. But if that's the case, then we need to make people clear about that and be like, you can't be like, I am gateway 05 compliant. You have to say the patch release as well, because the conformance test might change. That's okay, but we just haven't set that expectation yet. And it's just about expectation management. That's all. We can do anything we like. We just have to tell people what we're going to do and then do that.
Mike, I think you look like you're about to say something, or maybe someone else was.
No, just agreeing. Yeah, I think that either expectation is reasonable as long as we kind of have consensus of like which path should we take. Like, especially if other implementations are also like testing against the pinned version and have the expectation that when I bump to a new patch version, I might have conformance tests that break and need to update those. Like, we should have agreement on like if that's a reasonable thing to expect or not.
Yeah, I get that. And my take is that it would be at least, maybe we need to time box this in the sense of saying, well, conformance tests are still in this non-complete state. We reserve the right to include breaking changes to conformance test in patch releases. The reason I'm even suggesting that, even though it seems to go against SEMVer and all these things, is that if we wait between minor versions to include these kinds of breaking changes, even if they're fixes, it cements this behavior and this expectation that when this bad thing happens, I'm going to get this condition instead of that condition. And it means for some period of months, users are seeing this thing, and then when they get to another version, they're seeing this other thing. So my preference, at least while we're still kind of building out the coverage and not at 100% yet, would be to allow breakage in patch releases. But that requires a documentation update for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. But yeah, I think it's fine as long as we write it down first and we have a PR where we say, hey, we're going to change the behavior conformance implementers, please take note. And people get a chance to be like, no, don't do that, please.
Yeah, sorry. We're version 0. And SEMVer is pretty clear on version 0 is for initial development. Anything may change at any time. So like, if we're going by that.
Fair point. Okay.
I would definitely twice before doing this once we say we're a V1, but we're version 0 as a Go library. And these are like some tests. I don't think we should overthink it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'll work on a PR to document this. And then we can work on backporting as we see fit.
Yeah, probably a reference on the versioning page, Rob, and then a reference on that new conformance page as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Next up on this list is edge case with repeated query prints. I just wanted to bring this back around because I know we discussed this in previous meetings and it kind of got lost. Thanks to Mikhail for creating this issue. It seems like broad agreement that we need to do this. But nobody working on it yet. I would love to get this fixed sometime soon. So this is just a reminder that this issue exists. It's well defined, and if you're interested, would love to get this one in. Yeah. Next one is this one. We had an issue that goes back, to the 800s, that it would be cool to have utils to deal with all our custom types. We introduced all kinds of fun custom types to simplify CRD validation, and in the process made it more annoying to actually implement the API. This is basically just, I think some libraries, some implementations already have utils like this, just the to and from pointer for basically every custom string type we have, or int, or anything like this. I want to be careful with this. If we merge this, will someone actually use it? This seems entirely harmless as a PR. I just don't want to accept code that will just sit there unused, but we still have this maintenance burden associated with it.
I mean, it feels to me like we're not going to know if anyone's going to use it until it's there. You got a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? Like people are going to have, people are going to write their own thing if that's not there.
Well,
Sorry,
there
Shane.
I
is,
would love to have this.
if
I'm
I'm
like,
not mistaken, sorry.
go ahead.
If I'm not mistaken, there is a setting we can change on the repository that will let us see people who are linking as long as they're on GitHub.
That's a good idea.
That's a very good idea.
I like
two
the
things.
idea of adding this.
I should put these as comments, but I'm not sure we should put these in the API package, and we probably should put Godot comments on them just to be consistent.
Yeah, that I think I already commented those, but if I haven't, they were intended. Yes.
Okay, I'll double check, but yeah. Other than that though, just turn on the settings and we'll be able to see. And then we can, by the time we finally decide we want to say we're version 1, we can make the choice and be like, nah, we want to pull them because nobody's linking to them.
Nathan, I think you were about to say something.
Basically just that I get tired of having these all over our code base, so I'm in favor of adding them. I was just thinking about that earlier.
I'm giving a +1 to this. I have it on my code base. I would use it.
Great. Okay, that's good to hear. That sounds like we should move forward with this. I'll make sure that we have the comments that were mentioned here. But anyone else, if you want to review as well, would appreciate it.
Yeah, I would also say, Shane, I see your concerns about having it in the APIs package, but I kind of feel like it's best to have it really close to the actual CRD defs. Like,
Yeah,
It's definitely easier to find this way, but it also feels a little wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add here, and I'll put a comment on the PR to this effect, is that it should have a little blurb at the top being like, what sort of things should be in this file. It shouldn't have, we shouldn't be adding custom validation things or anything like that into here. That's the webhook. This is for like very simple, things that let you do standard operations with the types, nothing more complicated than that.
Yeah, for a reference point, we have webhook validation in v1 alpha 2/validation. So it's just a sub package. I think that kind of pattern is what makes sense here. So it's still in the APIs package, but it's not included by default when you get v1 alpha 2. Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
cool. Okay, I'll make sure I add a couple more follow-ups on this one. More feedback welcome. This is 1310. And I think the last one we haven't gotten to yet. Oh yeah, this is easy. I got great feedback on this one. I have responded to everything. So if anyone is able to add a final LGTM, we can get this one in and then work on the follow-ups discussed earlier. And the last one, yeah. The last one, this one is something that I covered briefly at the very beginning here, and that's Steve's PR that adds HP route method matching. This is something we know we need. It looks very straightforward. I would, just having looked at it, would almost approve it, but of course we actually need to run it, and I haven't run this yet. So yeah, that's all I've got for this one. That's everything on triage. I think we've got everything on the agenda. Any last things, or can have our minute back? Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. It's been great to discuss this, and talk to everyone next week.
Thanks. See ya.